go off into the lands and find the adventure and see what happens. Part of me still yearns to see that played out. So, Alex, I don't know if you've noticed, but I have a tendency to like that Borderlands series.
I've noticed once or twice, maybe.
Yeah. So recently I was able to pick up Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. I keep wanting to say Wonderlands.
You're thinking of Tales of the Borderlands, aren't you?
I'm thinking of a million other things. It's part of the Borderlands series, but yeah, I picked up Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, and I've been tooling around with that game. And something interesting happens in the story, and I'm not going to give any specific spoilers, but this might be a mild spoiler for folks that are out there, is that in the game, Tina is leading your character through this adventure that is in her Wonderlands, and it's in a game called Bunkers and Badasses. And in this particular game, she's created a whole narrative of what you actually do in the game, and leading you through a quest against the Dragon Lord. There's a point in the game fairly early on where you realize that the control of the game has gotten out of her hands, and she doesn't even know what's going on anymore. It's taken on a life all of its own. And I guess the thing that really struck me about that was how interesting it was that the person running the game would eventually get to a point where the control gets taken out of their hands, and then they're trying to scrape together to figure out how they adjust for this random chaos that has now befallen the game itself. And it wasn't from the players necessarily, it was from the game world, the game itself. And so I thought to myself, we'll take a little thought experiment. Is there a way we could actually create what I'm going to call chaos mechanics?
Sure.
Into a game. Any thoughts?
Lots of them. So I know you didn't really play much of 3.5 ever.
No.
For D&D. Back in the old days, there were these things called random encounters.
Yes, I do remember that.
And there were tables for random encounters. Lots of tables you could roll on. Oh, you're wandering through the plains, adventuring? Roll on this random encounter table and see what you find. Oh, you're in the forest? Random encounter table. There was a random encounter table for pretty much any environment you were in, including urban.
Sure.
And so a way you could randomize a little bit of that and add some chaos and just random combat, which, people are hit or miss on, was that you could go, hey, I'm going to roll, you've been out here for a while, not much going on, you're just kind of traveling or whatever. Random encounter. Throw some chaos in there. The newer editions of D&D have kind of moved away from that, largely, I feel.
Yeah, I think that there's more of a curated experience that they're looking for from, I'm not sure about 4, but in 5, definitely, it feels like that.
Yeah, so those are ways you can throw chaos in there, but I feel like a lot of the players, newer players especially, are looking for more of a crafted experience. So throwing chaos in there is a bit harder with some groups than others, especially in how the game is kind of played more or less in overall scene as it's played. But you could absolutely throw stuff in there. I think it would be best to make sure your party and your group is okay with that.
Yeah.
Because some people don't want, you threw trolls at us for no reason. It's you guys just happen to wander into a troll's lair. They're probably going to be trolls there.
Yeah, it's very typical. In the 3.5 rules, I'm just curious, does the DM actually decide when those encounters are going to come into play, or are there actual rules of when you roll for the random encounters?
I think the DM just kind of figures out when they're going to happen, but I think there's not a rule, but a suggestion there for every 2 hours of travel or something like that overland, you should roll at the encounter table or something.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Something like that. I don't know what it is. It's been a while. I cannot remember what the suggestion might have been for that. But it's like, yeah, like, if you're just looking for something to cause filler and, like, have them fight something, you can roll. You know? And they had a list of monsters from CR 1/4 to CR, like, 10.
Sure.
Perhaps.
Sure.
You know? Really random. You don't know if you're gonna fight a bat or a freaking frost giant.
Perfect. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I ask only because if the GM is choosing when to actually do the random encounters, is it really random? Because the person who's running the game is deciding to throw a random encounter at the player. But if it's a mechanic of the game that creates randomness, then it's kind of out of the hands of the GM who's running the game.
Yeah. I mean, currently you could do some sort of randomness with, like, a, what is it? A chaos magic sorcerer? What is that one?
Oh, a wild magic?
Wild magic.
Sorcerer, yeah.
Or you could throw wild magic zones in there, too. Those are things that you can exist in. They can be pockets of wild magic.
Yeah.
If you want a little bit of chaos.
Sure, yeah. Didn't I end up... I think you had mentioned at one point when we were playing our campaign that we were actually in a wild magic zone at one point.
Yes, when you were
I just never threw a spell.
The gnome's home.
Yeah, in Nomengard. We were in Nomengard.
Whatever it was, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think I actually threw any spells at that time.
You threw some spells, but they didn't trigger any wild magic effects.
Okay.
I rolled for that.
Okay. Did you ever listen to Adventure Zone?
No.
No, okay. So they did a campaign called Ethersea, and it was Dungeons and Dragons, but it was a heavily modified one where they had a world that was under the ocean. One of the things that they did, they had their own ship, and they had like a preparedness rating for the ship. Based on what rations that they had and some of the other equipment that they got and everything like that. Before they went out on a mission, the crew had to roll a 100-sided die. And there was a table. Basically, they roll the die, they get a number, and then their preparedness rating gets added to it. Like it's like a stat bonus. And Griffin, who was running the game, had a list of essentially like 100 encounters. From 1 up to 100. And would basically, once we got a number established, would throw on the way from the main city to their mission whatever that die roll said. And it was not just like you now have to fight these dudes. It was NPCs that were introduced that would have not been introduced otherwise. Big encounters that would then become something later that trigger these events early or in different ways. The uncovering of an ancient civilization, I believe, was actually one of the random encounters that they rolled for that ended up being a whole thing in and of itself that changes kind of the course of what happens in the game altogether. Mm-hmm. And so that was like an element of randomness that gets added in, even though, Griffin knew what all of these were.
Yeah, it's a curated list, essentially, but you're not picking what you do by yourself, you're letting chance pick it.
Right. You're leaving the luck to the players of figuring out what to do.
So imagine if they just rolled the same number 5 times.
Yeah, I don't know what you do.
Wow, we have found 5 lost civilizations today. This has been astonishing.
Yeah, exactly. We only thought there was 1. We found 5. What are we gonna do now? I remember in the first campaign, they did something similar, which was when they were getting gear, and he created this, essentially like a gashapon machine, and these little capsules would come out, or big capsules. They'd spend their coin that they got from the organization they were working for, and they'd throw it into the machine, and they would roll a die. And the die roll would determine the piece of equipment that they actually got. So it was randomized what kind of cool magical piece of equipment that they got. And when they talked to him about it, he explained that while it does seem like you were getting good equipment for your character class, what I did is I created a random item list for each one of your characters. So, you know, you have a cleric and you have a wizard and you have a fighter. I didn't really want to give, like, the wizard stuff to the fighter class, but I did want it to be random what item that would work for a fighter you got out of, like, a list of 20 different items or something like that. I just think that it's an interesting thing, even from a challenge of the dungeon master or the game master or storyteller, to create these chaos mechanics that are legitimately out of their own hands to modify and change the story entirely in ways that they didn't plan on. And I can see it being scary, especially for people who are new to it. After you've created your big campaign and leaving chance to decide so much of what happens in the game. But I think it could be fun if you have the right group. How random do you think we should really get with the GMing experience?
I guess the question is, do you want it to seem random or do you want it to seem natural?
I keep coming back to that, like, old school original Dungeons & Dragons Gygaxian framework of the big living game world that's a one-to-one, like, time frame. And I think in those where players can go anywhere and do anything, those random elements are like everything to me. Being able to throw them in all over the place and just see what happens.
Big open world like that, the random elements are important because it makes the world feel alive. In a curated game world, they are less important because players want the things to feel impactful.
Right.
They want the stories. It's the argument that player deaths need to have meaning.
Sure.
You know, it's the argument that everything that happens in the story has to be impactful and have meaning.
Sure.
So throwing in random elements like that don't have meaning is something some parties and the players don't want. You know, and if you're going for a highly crafted experience, I can understand that.
Sure.
But at the same point, if you're going for something that feels more real world, like not real world, but like a living, breathing world,
sure.
I like throwing events and stuff in my game worlds that it's not necessarily a random encounter, but should you encounter this, it doesn't matter what level you are. We've been over this. It does not matter what level you go to this dragon's den. The dragon there is still going to be the level the dragon is. Yeah.
This is going back to that Oblivion v Skyrim way of doing world building, where in your Oblivion things will scale to the player, and in Skyrim it's more that everything is to a scale that you have to deal with. And your player has to just get better at doing stuff in order to handle it. I do think that it has a lot to do with the campaign that you're doing and how you're playing. I think in the modern context of how we typically play games now, what people are probably more familiar with 5e, or if you're watching like live plays and streams, the random part is less important than it was in older iterations. But a part of me really does yearn to be able to actually see and play that old school version of the game where you did have like this one big world that you inhabited and just kind of go off into the lands and find the adventure and see what happens. Part of me still yearns to see that played out. And in so doing, I think that the randomization of it is everything. I do entire quests that are all randomized on the roll of a die. You know, entire storylines, NPCs, make it as random as you possibly can. Less prep work. That's definitely
no prep work, essentially.
No prep work. You just throw a bunch of stuff on some lists and you just go with it. It's all on the fly at that point.
I'll improv. Let's go.
Let's go.
Just like this show.
Yeah, exactly. All improv. Okay, I need a bad guy, and I need a weather pattern, and I need an occupation from the crowd. Let's yes and this all day long. So I'm going to yes and this to the folks that are out there. What are some of the random elements that you'd like to see introduced to games, and how do you plan on implementing them?
Or what do you do about random elements that crop up that you don't expect?
Yeah, how do you handle the randomness of the world? I don't know. That's why I'm asking.